You've probably heard it, or you've seen it, or maybe if you're close enough, you might have even seen it. Germany is becoming drier and it's becoming hotter. Wildfires, severe drought, extreme temperatures, it's all on the menu in the summer of 2026, and yet it doesn't seem to be on the top of the agenda of many politicians, especially the topic of climate change. So is this claim true? Germany's overheating, but nobody really cares, at least not enough? If you stick with us today, in today's Berlin Briefing episode, you will learn why politicians are shying away from the topic, what the cost will be for Germany if there is no political action or not enough political action, and what should and could actually be done about the situation. And with us today, remotely, Maja Göpel. She does many things, but most important for our discussion today is that she's the professor for sustainability transformations at the Leuphana University of Lüneburg. Welcome, Maja Göpel. And we also have a political voice with us today. That's Jakob Blankenburg. He's from the Social Democratic Party, SPD, which is also part of the governing coalition in Germany. And he is the SPD's spokesperson on environmental and climate policy. So let's talk a bit about why politicians in Germany seem to be shying away from the topic a little bit. Jakob Blankenburg, is it hard to win elections with that topic nowadays?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And I think it was hard in the last years to argue about climate politics, because for many people, climate policy was linked to something that they should not do, and to politicians who will say to their constituencies what they should do. And I think this summer will lead to some different narratives, that people really feeling that if we do not protect our climate, and if we do not change, that it is really hard to keep the lives on as we're living it right now. So I think the narratives are changing right now, but it was quite hard in the last years, especially.
But I mean, we've seen that before. You know, climate policies always popped up, and then it was important, then wasn't important again. Maybe a question to you, Maja Göpel. Why isn't that a much more winning topic? What happened in the past for it to be the way it is right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it is important to zoom out a little bit, because when you think about it, we're talking about this for 40, 50 years, and it's always been accelerating as an issue, and then it's been fought. And I think it is important to understand that it is a political agenda to get it off the official directionality of where countries and economies are going into. We've had a huge fossil fuel industry funding and portraying the science as incredible, etc. The ExxonMobil case is probably most known. And then when we think back just 4 or 5 years, we did have a full-on support for, we called it social ecological transformation. I think it's important that we always worked from the scientific point of view to show that social issues are not a trade-off in fighting climate change, and so are not economic issues when you're starting to bank in the costs of inaction. So there we were quite far, and it was high on the agenda in Davos. It was the Green Deal of the EU. It was total support in the governments on many European countries. And that meant that accelerated the policy shift, thus the frameworks under which people take decisions, the information base that's holding them into understanding what is important right now. Then obviously it became bankable more easily when you understand that you start factoring in the cost of inaction or climate risks when you talk about financial balance sheets. But all of this needed the political framework in order to change those logics. I think it was too successful. And this is why we've seen ever since after the corona pandemic and then the Ukraine war, a complete full-on backlash also by governments that are fully dependent on selling fossil fuels, but also companies. And this is how I think we need to understand it. And with it, obviously, came that the right-wing populist parties declared climate science to be a hoax. And at the forefront of that, President Trump. Then it gets really difficult if the strongest nation is not only destroying multilateral agreements, but is also basically blackmailing the European Union to cut back all of its political frameworks that companies need to say it's going to be long, loud legal signals that allow for us to make the transitional investments.
And
so it is a highly
also more convenient
agenda
for people just to believe, that climate change might not be as severe as some parties are claiming? Is that what's happening in people's head?
Honestly, if I could make myself believe it's not happening, that'd be a really comfortable thing, right? So it is understandable, because the big challenge for climate change in particular has always been that it's so untangible, it's so invisible, you can't see the molecules. And there's a cause-effect chain that totally speaks against our typical abilities to mobilize for action, to take effort. That is that the consequences are delayed, not only in time, but also in space. For a long time, we thought it's going to be other countries that are suffering first. But as you mentioned now, the most recent reports are showing that it's Europe that's heating fastest out of all of the continents. And still this intangibility and then this time delay makes it very difficult. And we had a long debate on which generation is sacrificing and which is winning. And how do you get that intergenerational justice really calibrated rightly? So that is the challenge. And when then more and more people are saying, oh, it's so difficult, we don't really know how to move forward, it becomes more and more unpleasant. If you speak to these issues, you're being attacked. Then I just kind of shy away. I hide my eyes. I don't want to listen anymore. I don't speak anymore. And somehow I hope it's not going to happen to hit me the most.
And two of those aspects you mentioned, we'll talk about those more later. For example, how hard Germany will be hit and what possible strategies are to get out of this. But more on that later. I would like to play a soundbite by the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, who's not part of the party of our guest today, Jakob Blankenburg. That's important to remember. Friedrich Merz, of course, part of the center-right CDU, the Christian Democratic Union. And we haven't heard much from the Chancellor in the last weeks, specifically not on this topic. He's on vacation, to be fair. He did say the following, though, a couple of weeks back before he went on vacation.
We are having a debate not only within my party but across Germany and across Europe about how to effectively link climate policy with economic policy. My own view has always been that we must never deny the reality of human-caused climate change and that we must do everything we can to get the problem under control. However, I believe that we can achieve this most effectively if Germany uses its strengths to develop technologies that are so good that other countries will want to adopt them as well. That would be the best contribution Germany could make to tackling climate change worldwide.
So, Jakob Blankenburg, is that enough for you?
Well, first of all, you have to say that we already developed all the technologies that we are needing to tackling climate change. When I think of wind turbines, when I think of solar panels, Germany was one of the countries where those technologies were developed and where we had a lot of companies bringing those to market. And the rest of the world adapted it to that point that other countries just got cheaper and better at it. So from that point of view, the Chancellor is not that far from reality, but we already have the technologies. We do not need to develop them anymore.
So it's not enough.
I think
I'm hearing it's not enough.
No, because just saying that we have to develop technology, and if we do have the technology at some point, all our problems will solve on its own. It's simply not true, because you have to implement technology. You have to implement the technologies that we're having today. And you have to develop a framework where it just makes economically sense to implement those technologies. And I think Maja Göpel just said earlier that we have to talk about the social the social transition, social ecological transition, as we call it in Germany. And this is totally true. And to the social dimension, I would also add the economical dimension. And for a lot of people, it just makes sense to adapt green technologies in their daily lives. When I think of solar panels, a lot of homeowners are installing solar panels on their roofs because it just makes economical sense. Even those who are voting for a party who denies the human-made climate change. So it's really important to emphasize that it's not only a dignity that we're having as one of the historically biggest polluters on the planet, but also a very wise economical decision that we're doing, that we adapt green technologies and that we become one of the front runners when it comes to the adoption of that.
And Maja Göpel, so the Chancellor is linking climate policy with economic policy right there. Will that make it easier to digest for people?
It's been a long-standing issue to do that. And we've had a long debate about how to do that best. And some of the parties were claiming that we can all do it through a CO2 price mechanism. This is typically the people that are saying, let's solve it on the economic level. And then you have a lot of studies for ages and onwards that show, yes, having a proper price, which is the most basic thing you should do because it's pollution and the people that are polluting should pay for it. And then it makes it easier for the ones that show alternatives that are not CO2 intensive to have a better pricing mechanism in comparison. So this is always necessary, especially for new things to emerge and to become distributed. As what said, it's not that we don't have the technologies, we need to make them spread out. But all of those studies also very clearly showed that it's lots and lots of other framework conditions that are going to influence if they are going to spread out. So talking infrastructure, a renewable energy system looks completely different from a fossil energy system, and it needs for much more people to participate in it. This is where you have to think about other mechanisms, especially when you think about social things like contracting or leasing models, etc., because not everybody has the money to invest in a full-on ownership solar panels. But those are business models that emerge when you're staying firm on saying this is the way we're going with the policy frameworks, and we're going to make it easier for such new business models to emerge. And we have to tell people that it is going to change the way that our everyday structures are built. Now we're talking about cities becoming greener and alternative ways of moving around instead of cars having the priority. That is a mobility change. And this is why we've always been saying that a climate-friendly future will need to have a complete change in many of the ways that we do things. From nutrition, we can't eat that amount of meat anymore, to how we organize infrastructure. We need to get off the rails, onto the rails, etc., and how we build cities, because ideally we're going to reduce the distances people have to take. And then talking about adaptation to changes, they have to have more cool and quiet and places where water can be absorbed rather than just be washed out of the streets.
And
so
are politicians saying
approach.
that? Are politicians saying that openly enough? Yes or no?
They used to for a while. And then it's become, for me, one of the most tragic things is that when it became successful, that you have a lot of party politics and even personality infighting that have basically ruined a lot of what was possible. Because we had this so-called progress coalition, which was between the Green Party and our Market Party. They call themselves liberals. And then the Social Democrats. And it was supposedly the transformation coalition. And then Habeck, the Green economics minister, became too popular, to say it this way. And then it had to be a lot of bashing on him. And then you had an opposition party, the Christian Democratic Party, that I think deserves the claim of the least pleasant opposition party I've witnessed. Because it's literally lost its course in the way that it's hacked at the government, that it's used facts that were, or used numbers that were not facts, did a lot of smear campaigns, etc., that were really in the camp of what we are used from right-wing populists, just to discredit this government. And then obviously it becomes really difficult to get back into office and say, oh, basically we need to do some of those things, but we're going to have a retardation also of 2 years because we blocked it all. This is what's having a huge impact still on our economy. Part of why it's slurring right now is
we'll talk more about that later. That's something I had on the agenda for our later. I would like to talk a bit about the cost for Germany if we have no political action, or if we don't have enough political action in this country, what will it actually mean? And we've had a lot of statements in the past weeks on the situation, especially on the drought that was severe and that affected a lot of farmers, especially in southern Germany. And here's a soundbite we have from Joachim Ruckwied. You might not know him, but people are starting to know him in Germany because he's the president of the German Farmers Associations, and he said this the other day.
In many regions of southern Germany, it's still far too dry. We haven't had any significant rainfall since mid-June. The forage crops here aren't growing back anymore. This is the case on weak sites like clay or sandy soils. And this is also characteristic of the Franconian part of Bavaria, for example. There, the corn, whether it's grain corn or corn for the silos, is in very, very poor condition. In some cases, it's withered and hasn't formed any ears, so we expect yield losses there as well. In some locations, almost to the point of total crop failure.
And we also had a crew go down to southern Germany, to the region that was just mentioned by Joachim Ruckwied. And we talked to an organic farmer, and organic farmers are especially hard hit when it comes to feeding their animals and being able to feed their animals. We talked to a farmer named Tanja Zeller, and she reported firsthand from the ground what she sees every day.
Well, we actually have to slaughter some cows. We also had to slaughter 2 heifers that we actually intended to use for breeding. But we have no other choice. Because when Christmas comes and we run out of feed, we'll have sleepless nights.
So she's saying we'll have to slaughter animals because they don't have, what they need to feed those animals. Jakob Blankenburg, the SPD has been in power since the 90s, with interruptions, of course, but mainly. Your party, what's your party's responsibility that we've gotten to this point?
Well, you are right. We are in power since the early 2000s, and I think the SPD, together with the Green Party, initiated all of those policies that we have implemented today. We implemented a law that basically said you're getting money if you are installing solar and wind, which now leads to over 50% of our energy and electricity is coming from renewables. So I think we came a long way, and we came even further than at the beginning of the 2000s. A lot of people thought we could get. I think we have to say that in front. But you are right. All of the parties did not do enough that we are so people are suffering from all of those situations. We've heard the farmers. I am living I'm coming from a constituency next to the Elbe River where we're having extreme low water levels right now, and students cannot get to their schools by ferry, which they normally used to. So we need to talk a lot more about climate change and about climate mitigation, but we also have to talk about climate adaptation. This is something that basically did not play a role in the public debate in the last month, and I think it is very important not to get climate mitigation out of the viewpoint, but to emphasize that because we were not strong enough in the last years, we reached a lot of our goals, but it still was not enough. So we have to adapt to the extreme weather events that we're having right now, while still maintaining a high level of ambition when it comes to fighting climate change.
Of course, SPD came into power together with the Greens in 1998, if I recall that correctly. Very different times also when it comes to climate back then. Maja Göpel, do you agree with what Jakob Blankenburg just said? Is that the right focus? Have we come farther than many people believe in this country at the moment? What's your take?
I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. When you think of it, we have a lot of the answers there because people have done a lot of research, they have done a lot of experimentation. And as I mentioned before, there was a moment where everybody felt we're shifting the normal. And I'm a transformation researcher. When you think about when do we consider transformations to happen, is when the way that we do things turn into something different and we consider that normality. This is, it's not the deviation from how we do things, but it is the way we do things. And this is where a lot of suggestions were going to say, how can we point out the co-benefits of climate protection? And especially, for example, to stick with the farmers, they're having a huge opportunity to be solving the crisis whilst adapting to the changes that we can't avoid anymore. Because when you think about having different ways of soils, instead of a lot of intensified agriculture with a lot of pesticides, it is one of the biggest absorbing machineries of CO2. And then it holds more humidity. So you're not as easily dried out. And this just requires a different way of treating your land. So I remember writing a big report for our government on land use strategies in the Anthropocene. That was the big term that says, humans are really changing the way the earth works. And we should consider land use as one of the big angles in how we can both mitigate and adapt to the changing consequences. So there has been a lot of ideas around and a lot of programs started. And then when the next party comes in, they're being killed again. And this is what I hear from everybody that has an entrepreneurial approach to it or needs to have a business model behind it. We have to have longer, louder signals for us to allow those shifts, because everything that you transform is going to becoming a new normal that works after a considerable time of experimentation and building up. In the case of soils, it's up to 7 years until they really then grow their strength to be functional out of their own with the microbiomes, et cetera, in there. And this is what we call the delta of dooms in transformation research. You start changing, but before it's fully functional and robust and resilient in its new form, there is this transition period. And what we see in politics, and sometimes also in companies, obviously, is as soon as it gets tiresome, as soon as the first things don't work out, as soon as you're feeling like criticism comes up, you say, let's go back to what we used to call normal. This is why we have to stick through a transition period. It's typically 10 years for a sectoral approach. Unfortunately, we have a lot of government changes in between.
And the SPD does have a suggestion on how this could happen. We'll talk about that in a second. I would like to just stick to the topic of the cost for Germany, just for a second here with you, Maja Göpel. What happens if we forget about this again? After all, this usually happens in July and August and gets cold in winter and nothing really happens. What's the cost for Germany if that happens year after year?
Well, the typical approach that's being taken by macroeconomists is obviously to talk about the GDP or the billions. And there we have estimates up to 900 billion until in 2040, 2050 in additional costs. And those costs obviously emerge from things not being available anymore or things being destroyed. Or, and this is the importance when you start looking at accounting, what is accounted for growth and what should we talk about is actually covering destruction. And this is the thing where a lot of debate has been happening, because a flooding of the Ahrtal, for example, cost our state 40 billion to rebuild. It will factor as 40 billion in GDP because people have been paid, material have been used, machines have been putting to work. But obviously, I think all agree it would have been better had this not been destroyed and those resources being used for something different, for example, accelerating the energy transition. So when we talk about cost, it's always very, very important to step back and say what has been put into the calculation, which variables and which time length are we looking at? And then I think the most important thing is, and the farmer mentioned it, at some point we can throw as much money at the soil as we want, it won't grow anything anymore. And this is why there has been a long debate about human rights and risks and what we need to do, even if it's not economically efficient. We have to get out of this just because it's threatening our survival. So this whole thing, we can only do this if it's economically efficient, is a narrative that is really not helping.
Understood. Jakob Blankenburg, Maja Göpel mentioned it. It's hard to have consistency, stability over decades potentially for this kind of topic, because then you have a change in government and the next government wants to do it differently or has a completely different stance on climate change. Now, Your party suggested that climate protection and nature protection be inscribed in Germany's constitution. Do you think that will solve the problem?
Well, yes, it solves some aspects of the problem, especially when it comes to structuring the change. Because especially when we're talking about climate adaptation, this is something that is in the responsibility of different levels of government. So, for example, getting our cities more green is responsible of local government. Getting new buses and changing our transportation system is in the responsibility of the state governments. And we just pointed out in the last minutes that the problem of climate change and the solutions are much bigger than a local government and some small town could solve on its own. And what we are proposing now is that adapting to climate change is a responsibility for all levels of government, and the federal government should be able to step in and should help local communities with money, with personal resources, with programs, which we are just not able to do at the moment. Right now, we're only capable of doing those pilot phases, some research, just as Maja Göpel just pointed out, the early stage of projects. But when it comes to implementing those on a large scale basis, which we do need right now, because droughts are not only happening in southern Germany, as I said, here in my constituency as well, we're having low water levels. But on the other hand, in winter, I'm pretty sure we're talking about high waters and floods again at our rivers, just as the Ahrtal flood. And this is something that all government levels should tackling together. And that's why we need to change the constitution for that, to allow all government levels to work together.
And Maja Göpel, do you think this is a solution? Is this just a drop in the bucket, or could this be a breakthrough? Something like this?
Well, I think it ties in a little bit with the kind of which targets do we set, which is the climate goals, right? We had a lot of discussion of this. We also have put in climate protection as a goal for the additional money that's been taken on by the state when we alleviated this debt brake and had a special investment vehicle set up. If it's then adhered to, that's the political space we're in, because there are discussions right now. How is the directionality? How are those investments really impacting climate protection? Or is this bucket still used to be just paying off what they want to give to their voters? And we obviously see the exact same thing when we think about countries' willingness to fully adhere to their national decarbonization plan or programs. Some deviate more and others deviate less. We do have a mechanism on the European level that you get to pay if you're not meeting your goals. Germany is going to pay some billions there. But this is basically it. So it's very important to put it in the constitutions as something binding, because then you have something that can also be targeted by judicial approaches, which we've seen as a new approach over the last 10 years to say this is not just economics, this is not just political, this is literally impacting human rights, and this is literally impacting citizens' rights. So this is something that's easier when it's down in the constitutional space. And still it is a long way to go. But the other aspect I think that's targeted with this initiative is to really think about responsibility and subsidiarity and how can we align this better in a changing environment, and obviously in also different tasks, because the national government will say we need to change this and that, but where that change is happening is on the communal level, where people are hacking, are in the middle of the Delta or Doom, are saying these are all construction sites, this is not working. That's at the local level. So there's a longer, bigger debate right now, which is underpinning, I think, this proposal, which is how can we realign responsibilities and then right to act and funding streams? Because right now it feels like the communal level is should be doing ever more, is not getting more money. Then you've got the Länder level in between. And then you've got the national level. And each one of them is run by politicians with their self-interest. And we've had so much calamity on this. This is why I think it'd be huge to not only think about constitutional change, but we have an additional program on realigning, making state activity more synchronistic and more effective. And I think those should go together.
And I can see Jakob Blankenburg wants to say something, wants to react to that.
I just wanted to add to that this constitutional change would not be the one shot that solves it all. I think this would be under complex, and this does not relieve us from the need to build progressive majorities after the coming elections, which are, to be fair, in 3 years. But we currently do not have those in government. We do not have majorities for big climate-friendly laws and policies, and so that's why we are doing one step at a time. But what we are trying to do with this constitutional change is to, as Maja just said, to reprioritize and realign and create the conditions that might be happening. A progressive majority in the future can step in and can align government funding differently. For example, right now we're still not able to do that.
And let me ask you a follow-up question, kind of to wrap it up. Many of the things we talked about here, Jakob Blankenburg, you have a lot of plans, but we have also regional elections coming up in Eastern German states where the far-right AfD is polling as the by far strongest party. And the SPD is struggling in certain parts even to make it into parliament. What is your maneuvering wriggle room, if you look at it realistically, when it comes to climate policy?
Well, when we're looking at the polling, when I speak from a political point of view, and I'm looking at the polling, the people who are against climate policy, they are voting for the AfD, but they are not voting for the SPD. If I'm just looking at who I want to reach as social democrats, I think the people who are voting for us or who might take in consideration voting for us, they demand strong climate policy. And that's why we are proposing that, because it's something that people deeply care about, and that people know is a necessity. We then can talk about the specifics of that. So what does it mean when we are transforming the personal level of transportation, for example? What does it mean if we rebuild our energy infrastructure? What does it mean in the day-to-day lives? But on a general level, people are demanding a strong climate policy because they know that if we do not change and do not adapt to the situation we're in right now, that we're getting in big trouble, not only because of the changing climate, but also because our society is heavily dependent on the resources other countries are selling us, and they can use them as a leverage against us. So it's really a necessity for us to be strong on climate and to emphasize this in the government. What, on the other hand, is possible with this conservative party, as Maja Göpel just pointed out, who shifted a bit in their time in opposition from center-right to a bit more to the right, is the other question.
And Maja Göpel, also to wrap it up, I mean, you've presented us with a profound knowledge of the topic, obviously, with the statistics. You know it all. If you get a bit more personal, and you had the German chancellor sitting in front of you, which might have happened, by the way, in the past, and you wanted to give him a message, to shake things up a bit, what would you say?
I would literally say, don't try to copy the far right, because every populism study tells you it is going to up the original. That's exactly what happened. I mean, he started off as saying he's want to cut the AfD in half, and he's doubled it. And I think the most integral part of being a countering force, to me, is to not do the things that they do. this is lying or being a bit not so willing to pinpoint where the pain points are. I would really say, speak the truth. This is how you're going to win back people's trust, that you're looking at the situation with sincerity and honesty, and then point out why you have a plan and why you're willing to measure your success on concrete outcomes on people's lives. Because what he's attached to is just abstract numbers like GDP, etc., where everything can be hide behind. But you need to say, we're going to build these bridges. This is going to be how your inner city looks like. This is how you're going to be having health insurance. This is how farmers are not going to continue to block climate protection. It's coming to a point where you think, people that are protected or blocking policy for climate protection and then saying, pay us for the outcomes of that. I think this is going to be a conversation we have to have with the same kind of insincerity. I do really think that staying calm, staying very fact-oriented, being willing to explain where we're at and what's necessary, and highlighting what is going to be beneficial and highlighting who is literally trying to improve this, that would be my recommendation as a recipe. I really think that people are yearning that almost as a counterbalance to something where you don't understand anymore what's true, what's not true. You understand it's getting very vicious. You don't understand when you're going to be hit at. And there's a lot of money also from the US that's funding that kind of right-wing agenda. So we are subordinating Germany and Europe.
And that would be specifically tailored to climate change, right? That's what she said. Because you also mentioned the health insurance, but your message right here is specifically on climate policy.
I think generally, when you think about what could be the antidote to holding up this, because I'm finding it super important for people to understand climate politics or policy has become one of the building blocks of a right-wing populist agenda against democracies. People tend to say, oh, you climate policy people, you've built up the right-wing populists. No. They've picked one issue after another where they know that they can seed mistrust and where the state will have to play a bigger role. We've had it with debt first, with Europe first, etc. So they've gone through the agendas, and climate change just is one very good one to be using. And this is why I think it cuts through everything, but in particular in climate change, I know the statistics and I know people that are saying, I would wish for, but I'm so concerned about many other things, and I don't have the trust that our CEOs and our politicians are going to do anything about it. We need to find that trust back.
And I think that's a good way to wrap it up. Maybe, the main takeaway here could be people in Germany understand what's at stake and they feel it because of this summer in 2026, way too dry, way too hot. But sometimes it's more convenient to believe other voices that claim that climate change is not as bad or not even happening. And that's just the way people function. And I think we all agreed in this panel here, at least our two guests agreed that a lot more needs to happen. It needs to be more consistent, and it needs to stay in place even if there is a government change. So thank you very much for being with us today at Berlin Briefing. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter. That's super important. Also leave your comments, what you would like us to talk about. And if you're watching us on YouTube right away, don't forget there's always the possibility to listen to us on Spotify, maybe when you're on your way to work or something like that. We would appreciate it and hope to see you soon again. Thanks.